Good afternoon, sir. You may start now.
Okay, somewhere here. Okay. Click on that. Okay. Now here you have to go to screen. First you have to minimize and choose that one. It's also. This is IIT Kharagpur. Is that the one? Not this. Close that. Here I think this one. Go to beginning. No, go to beginning. This is the first one. No, wrong. Okay. You have to go there.
Sir, am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible.
Sir, you may start.
Yeah, I'm just trying to put the presentation on. Share also here only. Your entire screen. Okay, now you go to the other one and ask them whether they are seeing. Now you go back to this. Are you seeing the screen now? Hello?
No, sir.
Hello?
Sir, screen is not visible.
Okay. It is coming actually. No, then you put share. Okay, now you go there. Go back to that. Are you seeing now? Hello?
Yes, sir. Now it is visible.
All right. Okay, I'm just changing the slide. You see it's changing. Is it changing?
Yes, sir. It is changed.
All right. Okay, I'm ready from my side.
Yes, sir. You may.
Straight away, no introduction, nothing. Hello?
Yes, sir.
No introduction?
Yes, sir. You may start.
No, are you not going to introduce?
Yes, sir. Actually, we have introduced you
You have
beforehand.
already done.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Okay, good afternoon to all of you. It's indeed a pleasure to participate in this program and talk to you about the Indian space program and India space technology. And what I intend to do today is take you through the development that has happened and also look at how space as the fourth frontier, what kind of challenges it is posing. See, it all started with the thinking and the approach of a great visionary scientist, Dr. Vikram Sarabhai. It was his idea and it was his foresight which enabled India to move into this technology of space and trying to bring in this capability for national development. And what he said is worth recalling. He said this was in the late 50s and the early 60s. What he said was a positive approach out of our predicament lies in finding solutions where the particular disadvantage of developing nations, which is that they have little to build on, is made an asset rather than a liability. It is necessary for them to develop competence in advanced technologies and deploy them for the solution of their own particular problems, not for prestige, but based on sound technical and economic evaluation and involving commitment of real resources. It was he who pointed out our national goals involve leapfrogging from a state of economic backwardness and social disabilities, attempting to achieve in a few decades a change which has historically taken centuries in other lands. This involves innovation at all levels, Dr. Vikram Sarabhai. That was a quote, and it was his vision of using space technology for national development, enabling capability demonstration, capacity building for harnessing space technology to meet the national, societal, and requirements, and also to be a significant player in space economy. Now, when he started this program, he actually made use of his friendship with American, French, Russian, and German scientists and brought in the form of kits, sounding rockets, which were assembled in the church building, what you are seeing in this particular slide, because he had convinced them that we have a unique place globally, a place very close to geomagnetic equator, where if we conduct upper atmospheric research, it will be beneficial for the research community. And with this, when he started the action, actually he had to take the help of the priest to convince the fishermen in that area for them to allow us place for conducting these experiments of sounding rockets. And at that time, he had also told that if you vacate this place and allow us to conduct these experiments, one day in future, the country will benefit. Just as though to demonstrate that and also to prove that point, from 1999 onwards, India, ISRO was able to provide to the fishermen in the country through Indian National Center for Ocean Information System specific information about where the fisherman has to go for fishing. This was achieved by looking at the color of the ocean from the satellites going around Earth at about 800 kilometers, and then through the color of the ocean identify chlorophyll, and through that identifying the food chain of the fish, and specifically telling where the fish catch will be available to the fishermen. To this, we also added recently a capability based on our navigation satellites. A small gadget which is fitted in the boat of the fisherman enables the fisherman to locate himself when he is in the ocean, and also through the messaging system he gets to know where to go for fishing, because the communication between the small gadget and a mobile in the hands of the fisherman, mobile need not have any connectivity to terrestrial towers, but these two communicate using Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and then the mobile in the hands of the fisherman is used as a display tool. As a video compass, it directs him to prospective fishing zone and also tells him in his mother tongue any weather vagaries that could occur, or if he is approaching any international boundaries, he is alerted. So you can see here an example of a person who does not know reading or writing getting the benefit of the latest technology of being able to using rockets, put a satellite in space, and using that providing communication and remote sensing based information in the hands of the fishermen. And another thing that also happened using the space technology in the initial years is our ability to do cyclone prediction, because you may remember in the earlier decades, super cyclones used to result in loss of lives in tens of thousands. But today, by virtue of the space technology, you are able to tell the location and time at which a super cyclone or a cyclone is going to hit the coast. And as a result of timely alert, the disaster relief agency is able to evacuate the people and save lives in tens of thousands. And even the recent the Amphan super cyclone, what was done in India was also appreciated by United Nations bodies. Now, one of the things that was done using the space technology in the very first demonstration, what Dr. Sarabhai had enabled is conducting an experiment way back in 1975, where using the most one of the advanced technology satellite built by Americans, which was borrowed and brought over India for about a year, and using this in about 2,400 villages, equivalent to today's direct to home television, was demonstrated by what was called as direct to community sets. And in this 1 year's experiment, ISRO was able to demonstrate to the country that remote places could be accessed through space technology for broadcasting, because at that point of time in 75, only four metros had the privilege of looking at broadcast television services, and many other in no other part of the country had this privilege. And if it were to wait for the technology available at that time to provide the services, not only it would have taken huge amount of funding and also time, and use of space technology enabled quick deployment of satellite based communication, meteorology, broadcasting, and also in terms of specific information exchange, whether it is for stock exchanges or ATMs, etc. So, starting from a set of satellites which was originally designed in a way which was very different from what others had done. INSAT 1 was an example where, for the first time, a 3-in-1 satellite was conceived and built, a satellite which had simultaneously capability to provide communication, broadcasting, as well as meteorology in one platform. And such a platform at that point of time did not exist, but then that was what was realized. And since the INSAT 1 series, all the subsequent satellites have been realized indigenously, and today we have a capability of providing direct to home television, a large number of communication capability in different frequency bands, and also providing high throughput satellites like GSAT 11. And very soon we are also going to have many more satellites like GSAT 20, etc., which will provide up to 100 GB capacity to cater to the gram panchayats being linked through the satellite connectivity, broadband connectivity up to 2 megabits per second, etc. So this kind of system is being developed, and already we have about 14 or so satellites providing communication system. And then the high throughput satellite, which is what I was talking about, which will give connectivity to almost 6,500 gram panchayats, and also remote places like island connectivity is all being provided through such a satellite. And then navigation system, here again India took a very different approach from rest of the world of providing indigenous capability of providing navigation systems, both for the Gagan, which is actually specific information based navigation system which can provide safety of life and then assured service capability, where gadgets fitted on the aircraft with this satellite based receiver enables them to do en route navigation as well as precision landing. And to this we added our Navik constellation, a unique constellation of 7 satellites capable of providing, through a small gadget on ground receiver, locating yourself within the boundaries of Indian border beyond up to 1500 kilometers, so that you can make use for a host of application. Today you already saw how the fisherman is using that, Coast Guard is using. A large number of companies have brought out small gadgets using Navik capability, and it's also being used for both strategic applications and otherwise. Then in terms of remote sensing, as you can easily visualize, when you go to space, you can look at what is happening on Earth in various spectral bands, from visible to near infrared to multispectral and microwave. So we have built over a period of time a capability of looking at Earth in different spectral bands. Today we have sub-meter resolution imaging system. We started in Bhaskara in 1975 with a 1 kilometer spatial resolution. Today we have almost 0.28 or 0.3 meter resolution systems, and then you can look in different spectral bands, and this is forming the backbone for various monitoring activities of the government and in terms of planning. Similarly, in terms of meteorological satellites, today data collected from geostationary platforms every 15 minutes, you can look at what is happening over the Indian subcontinent and surrounding areas. You can find out the vertical temperature and humidity profiles, ocean wind vectors, using a host of satellites. And all this is going into not only our numerical weather forecasting models of IMD, but also it goes into the numerical weather forecasting models of international community. And we provide this information to the global community within about 3 hours of acquiring this data. And we are also part of the global system. And as you can easily imagine, when you are looking at Earth from space during the monsoon period of the June to September, the clouds actually encompass the Indian subcontinent, and they will be a hindrance for visible and infrared wavelength. But like we can see through the a transparent glass in our visible radiation, microwave can penetrate through clouds and then can look at the objects. And we have a number of microwave sensors which provide us day, night, or all weather capabilities. And today we have a number of synthetic aperture radars providing very useful information to the country, both in terms of agriculture monitoring, but also in terms of other strategic applications using inclined orbits with more frequent coverage. And not only that, we have a scatterometer, which is again a very unique instrument, which helps us look at the ocean wind vectors. And you can easily imagine that information about the ocean wind vector becomes a very significant component in numerical weather forecasting for various activities of weather prediction. Then we have also built a satellite which was doing digital elevation model, and then can provide you information about the equivalent of fly-throughs over specific regions, and not only over India, but we also have the digital elevation model data for all the countries surrounding us and a major portion of the globe, using a satellite which was exclusively developed for providing such digital elevation model data. And this was one of the very important components of remote sensing. And then apart from this, these satellites also provide us capability for disaster management support, both using satellite based sensing and also corroborated with in situ observation, enabling floods, forest fire, drought monitoring, cyclone and extreme weather, landslide, and even the the locust monitoring. You will see an example later. So based on all these capabilities of having our digital elevation model data, observing Earth and atmosphere in various spectral bands, using navigation based position sensing information system, using our own NAVIC, and then a set of in situ observation sensors, and using modeling, we have a suite of applications developed which help us do socio-economic security, sustainable development, disaster risk reduction, and governance. In all these areas, this data is being used and models are being used. What ISRO has done is has worked with a number of other departments, whether it's Ministry of Environment and Forestry, where Forest Survey of India brings out biennial state of forest resources. Ministry of Earth Sciences makes use of it for potential fishing zone, as well as IMD for weather. Then Ministry of Agriculture uses it for the forecasting crops ahead of harvesting, and then Ministry of Water Resources, Civil Aviation. So like that, a large number of departments we have worked with and provided. And also the Honorable Prime Minister made sure that use of space technology gets into more and more departmental usage. One very specific program was conducted a couple of years back, where the secretaries of states and central government departments were brought together. And on this occasion, Honorable Prime Minister himself spoke extempore and told the various ministries, secretaries, etc., how space technology can be utilized for various activities of monitoring, planning, and governance. And as a result of that, more and more usage of space technology based information is happening in the country, and more than 58 ministries are using it now, and additional work is a continuing activity. And as an outcome of this, like I was telling, more than 158 projects have been formed, and then some 23 expert groups were identified, and a lot of work is in progress using these activities. Then, in terms of using this data, periodic assessment of natural resources are done every few years. There are more than 17 cycles of complete land use, land cover maps have been done. Then wasteland mapping, land degradation, desertification, and a host of other activities are done using this. And similarly, if you look at disaster management and support, both in terms of flood monitoring, and providing specific information to the relief agencies, and has been provided, and a host of such activities are regularly happening, and various departments are linked to such data set. This was one of the examples I was talking about: locust surveillance using the space-based inputs, identifying specific areas which could be affected, has been done. And then you can also easily visualize that the consistent set of data collected over a period of time can be used for climate related studies and climate research to identify glacier melting or tree line shift as a result of climate change, on ocean coral studies, and then identifying specific parameters which will help us understand the changes that are occurring in the climate. These all become a very useful data set for that. And even during COVID time, the government and state governments have taken many steps based on specific information generated, whether it is tracking or hotspot identification, or bringing material to the vegetable markets, food for providing food for the needy, identifying location, and then home isolation, pollution monitoring. So host of these activities have happened. And then this is an example of Sagar Mitra, an in-house developed network support emergency messaging for fishermen while fishing at deep sea, and having a small gadgets which are get linked via our Navik, and as well as the Coast Guard monitoring using our geostationary satellites. The linkages have been provided. And here is again an example where the mobile satellite service application is also used for actually tracking the train during its services, and also providing specific information in unmanned level crossing areas, and providing capability for Coast Guard, etc. A host of such application. And today you would also have seen recently in the papers how railways are making use of these programs more and more effectively, and trying to bring in gadgets fitted into the trains for improving the efficiency of the services, etc. And then similarly, if you look at beyond this, what ISRO has also done is, while we have been building capability to go up to geostationary platforms, which is about 36,000 kilometers, we have reached Moon and Mars, reaching 3.85 lakh kilometers, or Mars, which is almost a few hundred million kilometers when it is closest to 25, and farthest almost 400 million kilometers. And then develop a specific 100 feet diameter antenna established in Bangalore ground station for doing communication with such satellites. That is the ability to go beyond Earth's gravitational field and reach Mars, and has also been demonstrated. And then using these capabilities, building systems for space astronomy. Today you have the Chandrayaan-1 mission, which had the, actually you can say, credit of discovering the process of water and water molecule formation and presence in Moon was discovered. And our own Chandrayaan-2 is actually improving on this capability by virtue of our intrinsically indigenously realized hyperspectral imaging systems in the infrared region, and also dual frequency synthetic aperture radar, which is improving over what has been done earlier. And then Mars mission, again, you're all quite familiar the complexity of this. When it was launched in 2013, the task cut out for the satellite was, after traveling for about 10 months, at the end of that period, after traveling 600 million kilometers, it should be in a specific space in the outer world, or in space within a cube of 50 kilometers at a specific time on 24th September 2014, 7:30 a.m., for it to get actually inserted into the Mars orbit, and all that could happen successfully. And then you also see some of the outcome of what was done in the Mars mission. They're generating the entire Mars surface, observing in some specific wavelengths, and then studying about the dust storms on that, and various these have all helped in planetary studies. And another very important and very interesting development was, we have in our astrosat a telescope which has an angular resolution 3 times better than the best in the world in the far ultraviolet region. And also it has got a sensitivity which is much better than any other satellite based telescope which is operating, even better than Hubble. So because of which it was able to observe in deep space a signal coming in far ultraviolet, and which came, and this is actually a major breakthrough. And this is also provides a very important information. 9.3 billion light years away from Earth, the UV light which emanated has been picked up for the first time using this particular telescope, which was totally indigenously developed, and the team was led by Ayuka scientists. And then for doing all these activities, we went through an evolution of launch vehicle technology, starting from sounding rockets, gradually building the capability of to GSLV Mark III, which very soon is going to get human rated and will be able to do manned missions. And then the while all this is going on, you also need to keep yourself abreast of the newer technological capabilities, like the scramjet engine, where picking up oxygen en route and then using that for sustaining the flame for about 30 odd seconds using a specifically designed engine. This was demonstrated. Then ballistic re-entry, and then development of cryogenic engines, which has also been demonstrated. We have 3 versions of this engine currently in operation, and for future semi-cryo engine is under development. And similarly, if you look at the geosynchronous, like cryogenic engine development, a huge number of facilities and total indigenous development had to happen, which also required facilities for simulation and testing. And all this has enabled India to be one of the few countries in the world to have an end-to-end capability. This is what I was talking about, the advanced space transportation technologies, where the scramjet engine being demonstrated. And then work is in progress to have a landing exercise done, where up to 25, 30 Mach number aircrafts come down and land safely. So these exercises are in progress. And also you are familiar that ISRO has been tasked. Earlier, the plan was before the 75th year of Indian independence, but because of COVID, this could get slightly delayed. But then work is in progress on the manned mission through the Gaganyaan program. And then on the whole, if you see, starting way back in the early 60s, today more than 77 launch vehicle missions have happened. 104 satellites of ours have been launched. Not only that, we have also done more than 340 plus satellites of 34 countries being launched using our capabilities, including 104 satellites in one go. So the whole idea is, while you are building your capability, you made use of leapfrogging, what Dr. Sarabhai had been mentioning, whether it is trying to conceive of technologies which did not exist at a certain point of time, or trying to push the technologies beyond what was available. See, and then looking at things in a manner which was very different from what the rest of the world had done. For example, here, like I was saying, the very first conception of 3-in-1 satellite for communication, broadcasting, as well as meteorology together, or using it for fishermen's application or the weather forecasting, use of Navic constellation as a novel approach for providing regional based navigation, or even looking at interplanetary missions using the limited resources that we have. All this, so what it has shown, ISRO has shown, is you are not constrained by what is the resources that is accessible. You can make the best use of what is accessible to you and go ahead and then achieve success in various activities. Now I'll quickly go through some of the development that has happened as a part of this. One of the thing is feast. We are all quite familiar that software development, India is supposed to have a great capability, but still, if you look at in engineering applications, we still depend on a large number of softwares developed internationally for usage. Towards the contribution of towards indigenizing this, we have a software which was developed, now is going through a process where every year an event is conducted, and a collaboration with various academic institutions, the new versions are being brought out and released. And this is an indigenous software development which has three versions of it: academic version, professional version, and every year a specific event where the new addition to this is being made. And this is one way of trying to improve our ability to translate the technologies that are developed towards facilitating indigenous realization. And this is where academia has a tremendous opportunity to contribute, and many IITs and other institutions are already working on this. And then I just want to quickly give you a glimpse of what kind of capability that is existing in semiconductors laboratory in India. Today, this is the only foundry in the country which is capable of providing 180 nanometer technology devices. And using this facility, which has been made operational since a couple of years, we have a number of specific components which have been brought out, and we are using them already in our launch vehicle and also in spacecrafts, whether it's a detector or a processor being used for our radar imaging satellite or launch vehicle processor, or imaging sensors and MEMS, a host of them. I'm just quickly rushing through that because of time. Vikram processor and A to D converter and devices for imaging applications, and also hyperspectral imager, which has already been used. We have flown this on the satellite and generated results using them. And there are also MEMS devices, and these devices are also being used for even medicine field. That means for doing actually almost instantaneous detection of some blood or the biomarkers, etc. So work is in progress on these kinds of MEMS devices. And then MEMS based inertial sensor. Then interaction with the academia, a large number of activities are going on. There is tremendous scope for this, taking it further. And then this is what we have been doing. I have just quickly gone through. Now I'll just try to bring in perspective what space, and then how space as a fourth frontier poses challenges, and what kind of things are expected to be happening both in near future and in the coming years, etc. See, by now we know that humans have already transformed. This is actually an image taken from a satellite which shows those developed areas which are actually visible as bright and lighted regions. And from that, you can also see the relative development that have happened across the globe. And then if you look at space, you can consider it as the fourth frontier beyond land, ocean, and air. And this is where a lot of things are actually shaping up in the coming years. And then you are quite familiar that in terms of application itself, we have talked about already communication, earth observation, exploration, navigation, and also for strategic purposes. Then space station. You also have space tourism and space habitats. They are all becoming realities. And if you look at between early 60s to now, more and more countries are getting into use of space technology. While the number of countries having capability itself is limited, but a larger number of countries are actually making use of it. More than 40 nations are engaged in full-fledged space activities today, and more than 100 nations are utilizing space systems and services. This is beyond the what it has done in communication and other activities. And then if you look at space as a global economy, we talk of economy growing up to $400 billion in the coming the few years, and where India also wants to make use of its technological capability towards being a significant player in global economy. And globally, if you see, people are trying to work together, whether it is United Nations outer space officers, or Committee on Earth Observation Satellite, or World Meteorological Organization, or Coordination Group for Meteorological Satellites, etc. They're all working to work with, trying to collaborate so that we can share our resources and provide for common good, whether it is for weather, or whether it is for climate monitoring, or even for global exploration. Countries and agencies are trying to work together. And then just examples of what kind of things are being planned in near future. And then beyond that, if you look at today, not only these government agencies, but also a large number of private enterprise is entering into the space arena, like what happened in the earlier times, land, ocean, and air. It is the private enterprise which has brought in the agility, the funding, and trying to make use of the capabilities to provide services and become economically viable and provide solutions. Today, a larger number of companies have already entered. It is not just the prerogative of nations to be active on space. And you are quite familiar, Elon Musk has already said that he wants to make sure that human species should become multiplanetary species. And towards this, the satellites, number of satellites that are being looked at, a constellation of thousands of satellites are being talked about. And already Elon Musk has brought in Starlink and hundreds of satellites in operation. And similarly, Planet Labs has more than 200 satellites in operation. So more and more satellites are coming into picture. And if you just look at what is the snapshot of space object, there are more than about 5,400 objects in operation. And this gives you the number of objects beyond 10 centimeters, almost 34,000, and about 120 million objects between 1 millimeter to 1 centimeter, which also results in a large number of objects going around Earth, which causes traffic problems. And then the issue of trying to worry about managing this becomes an important re-entry of space junks, and then how to take care of that. And if you look at space debris is going to become a threat. A lot of R&D and work is happening both among the researchers and private entrepreneurs to look at how we can clean up the space where non-operative systems or the debris already created can be actually scavenged, and then keep the space clean for that. And space tourism is already one of the key things that's going on. A number of companies are trying to make their systems. Today also, you are familiar, there are companies which are trying to give few seconds of free fall experience by having parabolic flights. And then these some of the entities are trying to provide few days experience orbiting Earth or in space station, etc. And then it's not far when space tourism becomes a reality. Already these companies, Virgin Galactic, SpaceX, Blue Origin, etc., are looking at what can be done. And then space habitat is again another thing where trying to build habitation outside planet Earth, whether it is on Moon or Mars or other planets, is another thing which is already capturing the imagination of a large number of people. and then activities are going on in this. And then space mining is another area where obviously both in asteroids and other planetary bodies there is huge amount of resources which could be actually harnessed. And towards this work, in terms of space economy, if you look at, which could be similar to what earlier the gold rush that happened in California, etc., it reminds. But then these are opportunities for the future when you look at space as a fourth frontier. Then asteroid exploration and exploitation of asteroids. This is another important aspect. And then this again, just I was trying to tell you that earlier, for example, the gold rush which happened on the land. Similarly, now asteroids will be such destinations where people are trying to go and land on asteroids or on moon and establish facilities for conducting the activities in future. Similarly, not only this, see, all this also depends on our ability to reach out to space and go beyond. If you look at the capabilities that exist today, whether it is in terms of propulsion systems or the cost of access to space, only when the economics of doing things becomes cheaper and cheaper, the idea of solar power being harnessed in space and being used for not only providing solutions on earth but also for providing solutions for systems in space itself will all become viable when the economics of doing things become more and more viable. And this is where a large attention is being paid by the affordable countries. It's only when the countries become more and more affordable, or entrepreneurs who have their kitty and they are looking at investing and making things happen. Energy is another area where the both for green energy as well as for providing for future interplanetary travel and other travels use of this. So this is just a slide showing space is also becoming a place where, as the countries become more stronger and stronger, they also start looking at space as another avenue through which their intrinsic ability to dominate or control things can happen. And you are already seeing examples of this, whether it is ASAT or other things. And America has already got a space force which they have established, and even other countries are looking at such things. So if you look at this slide, shows among the different capabilities where the different countries are, and then India, once it's able to do the human space mission, it will become among the four countries having the capability of its own launch, its own satellite building application, etc. So that, in a nutshell, you can say is it. I'm trying to take you through the journey India has taken of trying to build a space technology for the benefit of the country. And then as we become economically stronger, then not only economically stronger, but also when the need for use of space technology for essentially supporting the country's requirements of sovereignty and strategic requirements, you also need to look at how you can make use of these capabilities for other applications. Toward this also a lot of work is going on. And then more than anything else, this year, also the last 1 year happened to be the centenary year of Dr. Vikram Sarabhai's birth, and a great visionary who envisioned use of one of the most advanced technologies for development of the country, and how the country has fared in this, as I tried to bring out as an example. And thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to talk to you about this, and also showcase to you how India has actually moved in this and where we stand. And I'll be quite happy to take any questions and answer those questions.
If any of the attendees have any question, they can please put their questions in the chat. Sir, there is a question from Ronnie Banerjee.
Okay.
He's asking, good afternoon, sir. How do you personally see ISRO balancing projects being associated with other space agencies versus indigenization? What should be the priority according?
Yeah, in fact, this is a very interesting question, and it's also always a challenge. See, when we started the activities, and also you can imagine that the very nature of this activity is such that the people are not likely to share many of the things because of the dual use technology and various other reasons. So what had to be done was, while you are trying to develop your indigenous capability, major portion of certain things, while whatever is accessible to you from international arena, both commercially as well as through collaboration, make use of it, but you try and develop indigenous technology for those activities where you are not likely to get support, and also in those places where there are only very limited or single sources for such a thing. See, because of that, today ISRO has been able to establish in the country for launch vehicle. We work with almost 500 odd companies, and major portion of the work actually happens in the industry, and special materials somewhat which were required have also been indigenized, whether it is the propellant material or even maraging steel or columbium, many even titanium, many of them efforts have been done to do indigenous development, because on those things where limited or restricted sources are available, you need to work, but where there is likely to be more than one source available, you can put it on a lower priority for development. This is how even the cryogenic engine, you will be recall that initially when Russians were willing to give, the contract was entered to into with them, but then when another country tried to force them not to provide the technology, we took up the entire thing, indigenous development, and we made it happen. So the best approach we need to take is, what is accessible to you, make use of it, and even while you are using the accessible technology, try to look at ways and means by which you can conceive of end results or systems which are different from what others have done. See, like for example, whether it was a Chandrayaan 1 mission or even Mars mission, where we could showcase that even with minimum or restricted resources, you can actually do things which are actually in some ways what others have not done. So it is and indigenization is a very important aspect, because people will actually be willing to collaborate or work with you only when you demonstrate your capability. For example, just to tell you that while we had been working with American systems for a long time, they were willing to commit on a joint mission only after Chandrayaan 1 and also our own RISAT mission, where the radar imaging satellite which we launched for our applications, it was indigenously realized and then launched. After that, we are working with them today for a program what is called NISR, NASA ISRO Synthetic Aperture Radar Mission, which is almost a $1 billion program. But out of that, major funding they are doing, zero point 0.1 billion is what we are spending. We are building the launch vehicle, satellite, and then we are launching. And in the payload, we have a component of our S bands are, while L band they are doing. So they were willing to commit on a common mission only after demonstrating the capability. So it's only when you show what you are capable of doing by demonstrating, people accept you as partners. So that's very important. So you always need to make sure that if something accessible to you, use it. So you don't have to be too particular that everything I should do indigenously, but then if something is likely to cause problem, you need to identify that and work towards that to ensure you are not likely to get stuck. That needs to be the approach.
Any other questions from the attendees? Sir, there is another question from Soumyadeep Chaudhary. He is asking, I always wonder how ISRO manages to do any projects with almost half the budgets of the other countries.
Okay, so actually, one of the key things, of course, is in terms of what you can see, the people who are working, the remuneration that is available to them in comparison with equivalent from the Western or developed countries is one of the things. And then the number of people actually getting, you can say, involved in a particular project, and then their commitment levels vis-a-vis corresponding things happen, because most of the Western world has already got into the process where major portion of the thing happens in the industry, and it is the industry, because it's happening in the industry, the the cost also actually goes up. But then so far what was happening is you are seeing people working in the major portion of it in the government institutions, and then because of their commitment to do the work, so you are making, you are doing 24 by 7 all days working type of things. That is because the people are committed to producing results, and these were few of the things that were actually reducing the cost. And another important thing is, see, when you are doing the activity in a very systematic manner, see, using technicians for performing a set of tasks where all things are defined, what is done is he is given instructions on how to do things, and then if he encounters a problem, he will actually list down or record these are the problems, then that will have to be looked up by somebody else, and then they have to come and identify the solution. That also takes more time. Whereas if the work of a technician is being done by an engineer, he, as he encounters the problem, at that time itself he will work for the solutions and then find some solutions and can move ahead. So the total time also reduces. These are some of the aspects, but then such a mechanism cannot be sustainable for long time. See, today, while ISRO has demonstrated that you have a capability for doing space technology, today our limitation is capacity. Capacity can come only when we can do in larger numbers. That means today, for example, we have 52 plus satellites providing services in various areas from space. But for a country like ours to meet all the requirements of the country, if you compare with the advanced countries or countries like America, Russia, China, Europe, etc., you require almost 3 times this number to be operational, to provide solutions for various things. Now, if we have to do that, not only we need to launch more frequently, we need to build our vehicles much more numbers in. So for all this, you have to establish the infrastructure and capacity. That is where today the government is trying to make the new provisions of enabling the industry to be involved in all those activities which can bring in the effective resources, and government can spend on societal requirements and R&D, etc. So in some ways, that was what was happening. But then in future, as more and more private enterprise enters into this and industry enters into that, some of the advantages that existed may not be there, but actually it will be the more efficient and innovative, cost effective solutions which people bring, which can help us retain that advantage in future.
Thank you, sir, for your very valuable time. We are very grateful to you for sharing your experience and delivering and imparting guidance to all of us.
Thank you very much. Wish you all the very best in your career. And let me also just say a couple of things before I end.
Yes.
One of the things is, see, India as a country, when you are looking at, we have a heritage of a very long, we are the only surviving civilization, surviving longest surviving civilization. If that has happened, it is because of the intrinsic wisdom of our forefathers and ancestors, where India was looking at globe in its entirety, not only globe, the entire universe in its totality. and sustainable living, and ensuring that life on planet Earth and the entire the universe is an important aspect of our consideration. And we need to make sure that use of resources and use of various capacities that are available on the planet Earth is utilized in a manner where it is left sufficient time for recovery. See, everything is cyclical, it keeps happening in periodic manner, and if you want the sustainability, then you should allow enough time for that recovery to happen. Sometimes, like you would have heard of the golden goose thing, today all the management, what it teaches us is try to maximize your returns without worrying too much about the processes and the impact it has got on that. While one activity has done such a maximization of returns, it has resulted in whether it is pollution or whether it is non-renewable resources being exhausted, causing problems for future. So sustainability is important. Paying attention to the entire nature and life is important. And if this has to happen, we also need to remember that there is a tremendous heritage, there is a tremendous past, and there is enough wisdom which we need to make use of and incorporate in our methods of what we are doing for future, so that we can still showcase to the world that it is possible to progress, possible to continue growing and increasing our ability to live better lives on planet Earth. But remember that we need to leave it sustainable for future generation. So all of us have a responsibility towards that. And let me wish each one of you a great success in your career, and also remind you of that small responsibility, because you had the benefit of having access to certain resources. You need to make for the next generation, leave resources which are better than what you have found. Thank you very much. Wish you a happy new year and a great career ahead. Thank you.